You're lucky. You got both of us here, man. How's it going?
Okay, how are you?
We're doing tremendous, Dwyer. Man, I tell you what, we can't thank you enough for joining us. This is just a tremendous pleasure for us. And it just so happened that it worked out that we're sitting here the week of the 30th anniversary of Field of Dreams. How about that?
Well, things like this happen to me. I lead a magical life because of that movie.
Clearly you do, sir. That's pretty awesome. As we look at this and you've done so, in fact, it's funny. I was just watching The Cutting Edge the other day and I was like, there's Dwyer right there. I forgot about you in that movie. It's a great role. You were like the rich boyfriend that she was just sort of supposed to be with, right? And Sweeney, DB Sweeney, was the rebel that stole her away from you.
That's right. I describe myself as asshole boyfriend.
That's here in the credits, actually. So, Dwyer, it's funny because I was just, as we kind of get into this, and this is just, free flowing and conversational. It's all good here, man. So I was just watching the video from, it's hard to believe it's been 5 years now since you had the big reunion in Dyersville with Timothy Busfield, with, Kevin Costner, and you did that interview with Bob Costas. How cool was that? I mean, it's hard to believe it's been 5 years now since you guys did that.
Yeah. This movie just keeps rolling along, and it does seem hard to believe it too. Yeah, I just wrote the book 5 years ago, and here it is, the 5th anniversary of that already. So anyway.
Yeah, talk about the book. I was just checking it out. It's called If You Build It. It's available on your website, dwierbrown.com. Talk about this book. You can check out the first 30 pages for free there on the site, which is awesome. So much good praise for this, and it kind of chronicles, your acting career, kind of how it led to this moment and your inclusion in this film. Just kind of talk about the book and how it came about and kind of what your plans were for it and what the reception's been like.
Well, to be honest about it, for the first 25 years that the movie was out, I was kind of embarrassed about, people making a fuss over me because I had such a small part in the movie. I really feel like James Earl and Kevin and Burt Lancaster and Timothy and Amy did all this hard work to open everybody's heart, and then, I just take off my catcher's mask and walk right in. But I'd been sort of waiting. I'd hoped that Kevin or the director, Phil Robinson, would write a book about the movie because it was such a fascinating shoot and difficult and just magical and all kinds of things. And nobody ever did it. And after 25 years, I'm thinking, well, geez, I guess I have to write this book. So, so I started with, over the past 25 years, people have come up to me, in grocery stores. And, it starts out usually like, hey, did I go to high school with you? And I'm like, no, I'm from Ohio. I didn't go to high school out here. And then they'd be, oh, my God, you're that guy. You're the dad. You're the dad. And, invariably they start crying usually. They start telling me about their dads. And so here I am standing in a tire store in an airport and, some big guy is weeping. And I just found myself reaching out to these people, and I end up hugging them, and then we, go our separate ways. But it happened to be so many times, and people seemed very, they were determined to tell me how that movie changed their lives. I had people tell me that they changed careers, that, they hadn't spoken to their dad for 20 years, and that movie came out, and they went to see it together, and they just, got rid of their animosity towards each other, and, people who figured out that their person that they thought was their uncle was really their dad, and all because of this crazy movie. So I started writing those episodes down that I collected over the years that were, just happened between me and this other person, and I would be like walking away from it, shaking my head, and I'd write down a few notes. But when I decided to write the book, I started with those, and that of course made me think about my dad. And a lot of people don't know that my father died 30 days before I went to go shoot that movie.
Yeah.
When I was cast in the movie, he was perfectly healthy, and then I decided to stop in Ohio on my way to Iowa, and he happened to be going to the hospital the day before, and I got to see him and talk to him, and then he died that night. So it was pretty weird, as you can imagine, for me to leave my dad's funeral and then go play a dead father walking out of the cornfield to have a last catch with their son. So, it made the whole movie a much more bizarre experience than it already was. And there were so many problems shooting the movie with, the corn wouldn't grow because there was a drought going on, which, ordinarily farmers don't sweat that stuff. The rain will come eventually. They know that, but we have to shoot a movie, and can't imagine how stupid Shoeless Joe would have looked walking out of knee-high corn. so they had to do all kinds of machinations to get it to grow, and they took an insurance policy for $3 million with Lloyd's of London on the corn, and they got special permission to irrigate it so it would grow, and they also ordered 300,000 fake corn stalks made out of silk from Hong Kong. They were kind of on hold if they couldn't get the corn to rise. You imagine how stupid that movie would have looked with, artificial flowers in the background. But anyway, it magically in that heat, when they did start irrigating the corn, it grew. I mean, in fact, it grew like crazy. It got so tall, it was like 8 feet tall. So then when they wanted to shoot the corn stuff, you couldn't even see Kevin in the corn because it was 2 feet over his head. So they had to build a platform between the rows of corn so that Kevin could be seen, inspecting the corn, and they had to shoot it that way. So there was just crazy difficulty after other difficulty in shooting of the movie. So anyway, that's how I sort of started with the book. I talk about the difficulty shooting it, the people who talked to me about it, and I end up talking, somewhat about my dad. And anyway, it's been really fun. The book is was a great. I don't know. I'm really proud of it, and it's gotten it's almost got straight 5-star reviews on Amazon. So I think people like it as well.
Absolutely. And Dwier, you mentioned your dad there. You've said that did have an effect on how you went in and played the scene. Looking back now, here we are 30 years later. How do you feel that impacted or changed the way that you approached that final scene?
Well, what was kind of funny is obviously, my dad died unexpectedly. It was out of the blue, so I wasn't prepared for it. And I thought, I was aware, as you are, that, oh gosh, I have to go shoot this movie in 30 days. I mean, what am I going to do? I'm not going to be able to get through that scene, So that's what I was sort of thinking. The hardest thing was going to be, I'd have to kind of hold myself together. And well, the strange thing was, my dad, who was a pretty stoic farm sort of guy who, just never expressed himself, never said he loved me or hugged me, or, I couldn't get over, after he died, that he was just the happiest, that he was like Peter Pan, like he was literally just flying around everywhere, flying out to Saturn and flying back and just laughing. And, it was just a very strange feeling because, that wasn't my dad, but that was, completely unexpected. So then suddenly I have the opposite problem. Like, I think, well, maybe I can't even find any emotion in this scene because, my own dad's dead and it feels like he's happier than he's ever been. So it was very strange. What was great was I really did feel him in the cornfield there with, the ghost players who were there. And I think everybody who was on the cast and crew, I'd worked on movies for 30 years, have worked on them for 35 years. And usually, sets are pretty jocular. Everybody's teasing each other, joking around. It's pretty loud. But when we went out to shoot that particular scene out in that cornfield, it would get very quiet. Here we are in this, cornfield and getting ready to shoot the scene. And I think everybody sort of had this feeling like, like their dads were there, or, that this movie was going to be something bigger than just, any other scene in the movie. And, it would get very quiet, and then we'd shoot the scene, and then we'd be done, and go back the next day to shoot something else. And but it was pretty interesting for all those reasons. That there was a hallowed feeling about that field. I still is to this day, and I think it's because so many people have brought their fathers and sons and memories, and even their parents' ashes and stuff, and spread them on the field. So it has a kind of a magical feel to this day.
It does. I've been there myself. It's unbelievable. And, the one thing about it, some people may not realize, is that that final scene, which is so impactful, one of the most emotionally ridden scenes in film history, but original test audiences didn't quite understand the payoff between you and Kevin Costner there. They had to add in that where he calls you Dad. I mean, first off, how, do you think that the addition of him saying "Hey, Dad" was necessary? Do you prefer that? And really, when you look back at it, is it? Do you feel that that Ray and John each knew that each other that were their father and son, or do you feel like that? How do you feel like that dynamic was between the two? Like, at what point did they know?
Yeah, I mean, when Kevin and I talked about it when we were working on the scene together, I think we both felt that we both knew. But like when Moonlight Graham steps off the field and then becomes Doc Graham, I think, to me, part of what the great tension in that scene is that both of us realize we have this crazy, impossible opportunity to reconcile with each other, and that anything that we might do that would spoil that balance might send me back into the cornfield, might turn me into an old man, might, when you're dealing with magic, you never know quite what's making it happen. So to me, that's partially what made that scene so delicate and tense. Was I think both of us were like, oh gosh, I'd love to say, Dad, I love you, or whatever it is, but what if that's not allowed? What if that changes everything? So that kind of gave it that tiptoeing on eggshells kind of feeling about it. For me, I was sad to see that they had to put Dad in there. To me, it's like, geez, if you don't get it by then. But I guess the way the director, Phil, described it to me is people thought that that Ray, Kevin, was being cruel by not saying Dad, by not acknowledging, they weren't as clear, I guess, that I knew who he was. The only indication I give, I think, is a little glance I throw to him when he says, "This is my," and then, he's introducing me to Karen and Amy Madigan's character. So, anyway, I wish they'd left it the way it is, but I agree with Phil that if it was misunderstood by anybody and thought of as being kind of cruel, then that certainly would spoil the movie. So I've made my peace with it.
Well, Dwier, we hear that Kevin kind of felt under pressure in that last scene to not drop any of the catchers. You guys had a helicopter for the overhead views that was kind of another challenge and distracting to go along with that pressure. Did you feel the same pressure, if it's true that you guys kind of had to film that last scene in one take at twilight?
Yeah, it was definitely, it was just funny. It's one of those things that never occurred to me. I played catch with my brother 500 million times in our backyard. You never sit around there thinking like, "Ooh, I hope I don't drop it," But suddenly, because by the time the helicopter's warming up out there, I'm thinking like, oh my God, that catcher's mitt they gave me was a solid brick. It's like a giant bagel. You couldn't even tell when the ball hit it. So it wasn't without reason that I was worried, but I would be very surprised if Kevin was very worried. He's a very good ball player, and I played some when I was a kid. I'm a particularly good fielder, but it's just so funny when it's probably I don't know if it's $1 million shot, that last scene with the helicopter and a guy with a camera on his shoulder hanging out of it, and there was those lights in the background. That was actually 3,000 farmers in 1,500 cars that they'd gotten to volunteer to do that. It wasn't CGI back then. They could have done that in 10 minutes with these days with CGI, but back then, all those people were actually sitting in their cars, and the director was broadcasting on the local AM radio station the directions to he'd say, everybody start your cars. Okay, we're rolling, helicopter taking off. Okay, you guys, cars, move. And so these guys were hearing it on their AM radio, and they would start driving. It was very, very involved, to say the least. And we did think that we were only going to get one take of it, so that certainly added to the tension of shooting it.
Can you just talk about your character, John Kinsella, what kind of you saw on the script for him as far as kind of his place in this cosmos and this kind of magical world? Obviously, this is about Kevin Costner, his character's redemption and looking back to his past and finding peace and his relationship with his father. Obviously, there's a voice that kind of guides this whole thing. What do you think John's role is in this? Do you believe that he's just sort of like thrust into this universe? As obviously they mentioned briefly that you were, someone that, wanted to be a baseball player, that nothing ever came of it. All of a sudden he's sort of in this baseball game. Just kind of talk about what you saw in the script for John and where you think he fits kind of in this universe.
Well, I mean, I tried to play John pretty straightforward. The movie is, fantastical enough, but I mean, what was kind of beautiful to me was, what if, you died and suddenly you were in your favorite place in the world, the way some people actually imagine heaven to be, which is, I think, really where his genuine question comes out. Is this heaven? I mean, like, am I dead and this is what's happening to me? Or, so I tried to be as sincere as I could be about that, given the circumstances. I grew up in Amish country on a farm in Ohio, and one of the images that I had in my mind was as if you were an Amish child who suddenly got to go to the county fair, and all the bright lights and the crazy food and the games you could play and the rides you could go on, things that you'd never been allowed to do in your life. So that was one of the images that I tried to get behind, and my feeling always was that, John and Ray sort of want to say, I love you to each other. But the words are not in the script. So they have to say it with all the other words. You catch a good game, is there a heaven? And so to me, that's another reason that scene has such tension, is because the text doesn't match completely with the subtext, which I think is always interesting to watch in a production of anything. So I keep trying to say, I love you, son. I forgive you for saying whatever you said to me, and plus the idea that my son was responsible for building this field that gave me a chance to come back is kind of amazing. I mean, I don't know if you guys have kids, but when you start dealing with, your kids doing something
Sure.
incredible, you get a kind of thrill out of it that you can't take if you've done something great, And I think the same way with your dad. 2 words from him, good job, or nice try, or whatever the heck it is worth 1,000 words from somebody else. And because my father had just died, I wasn't yet a father myself, but I certainly, had nephews, and I got a sense of what that must be like. It's a very interesting thing to kind of be between those things, between being a father and being a son, or being both at the same time. That crazy, unspoken, very profound, deep relationship goes both ways, and it rarely goes that way with words. It's usually, that's why a catch, I think, is so profound in the movie too, is you could sit and play catch with your dad for an hour at sunset and maybe not say anything, or talk about the weather or somebody's new car or what's for dinner or something, and it has exponentially more meaning when the relationship is rife with potential misunderstandings and things that your dad just can't say. So you take those little I love yous out of nice catch and throw it as hard as you can at me, or whatever we say when we're playing catch with somebody. So anyway, I think those things are what John and Ray, those were the raw materials they had to kind of patch up their relationship after, 20 years or whatever it was that John had been dead.
Well, I want to get your thoughts kind of on the voice. I know it's kind of left up to every individual's own perspective, but I kind of feel like this is John trying to kind of get a message to his son Ray to build this and go the distance so that they can kind of reunite and come together. I kind of want to get your thoughts, what you think the voice is. Is that John trying to get a message to Ray?
Well, they didn't ask me to voice that role, that unseen role of the voice. And Phil Robinson knows who it was. I suppose a few sound engineers, but he's never told me. He's never told me or told anybody that I know of. I guess in my mind, I wouldn't think it's John. I wouldn't have thought it was me saying, "If you build it, he will come," just because that's a little. I mean, it's a little on the nose, and it's a little. I think it's more entitled than John feels. I don't think he would be on the other realm and saying, "Hey, make some place where I can meet you." I like the way it's, the way I imagined it was that, it was this sort of Shoeless Joe magic. And because Shoeless Joe was my hero, John's hero, it has that profound meaning for me that my son who rejected my hero, Shoeless Joe, would then build a field to have him come and play catch. And the surprise at the end is that I get to come too. So I sort of like that better as an interpretation. Of course, it's all in my mind. But yeah, that's the way I look at it. And the voice, I don't know why the voice. I mean, what's so great about it is, you guys had a crazy voice that said you should start a podcast, about nostalgia. Somehow that came to you. It wasn't probably in a cornfield and maybe as clearly as it came to Ray, but that's how all creative endeavors start. Somebody says, "Hey, we should have this," or "Hey, I think I could build this," or whatever. And, where does that voice come from? I mean, it's accumulation of everything in the universe and everywhere you've ever been and every person you've ever met, pushed you a little bit farther that direction. Some obviously more than others, but to me that's the creative force of the universe, and you can call it God or the universe or energy or whatever, but I think one of the things that's satisfying about the movie, I think, is because if you go on the journey with Ray to build the cornfield, then to drive to Boston or to get Terrence Mann, and then to Chisholm to find Moonlight Graham or Doc Graham, it pays off more at the end because you've invested in it. You've gone on the journey with him, And I always feel like there's a lot of people who don't like that movie. I mean, Rolling Stone called it the worst movie of 1989. So I know it's bordering on corny for sure. I mean, I watch it sometimes and there's moments that I just roll my eyes, but I think it's magical, and there's people who it's sort of like Mark Tim Busfield's character. Some people don't see the players. If you can't see the players out on the field, of course you think everybody's crazy and it's the corniest movie ever. But fortunately, there's a lot of people, certainly over the last 30 years, who have seen the players and go on the ride and get the payoff at the end.
Yeah, what a wonderful overarching themes and things that are at play here make it so multi-layered. And I tell you, it's just been such a pleasure to talk about this with you today, Dwier. The scene at the end is one of the most gently acted scenes I've ever seen, and you add to that James Horner's score behind it, and you've got just completely, isn't it, one of my favorite scores in film history, and your scene there, it was highlighted by that. I'll tell you what, we're going to have to call you back when we do our House and House 2, the second story podcast, because, brother, those are coming up, and I'm actually a bigger fan of House 2 than House 1. One of the only movie sequels that outdoes the original. You were in both.
Well, good, yes, and I think in that way I'm a trivia question myself. What actor was in both House and House 2? And just to throw that in, I did an episode of House MD, so I'm just like I'm a real estate guy.
Well, hey, Dwier, you've done so many things your career, and this is actors will always say, or musicians will say the same thing. If I can make one hit, if I have one song that people remember, if I'm in one moment, then that is worth a lifetime, and that's certainly this moment in this film, and it will never die. And it's something I'm so glad you've embraced and written this book. If You Build It, which is available on your website, dwierbrown.com. I tell you what, we can't thank you enough. This has been such a pleasure, and all the best, my friend. We'll be in touch for sure. And anything you ever have to promote, anything you're doing, you got our email. Never hesitate, my friend.
Well, thank you. And yeah, we went deep on this, man. I don't know if I've ever gotten so deep on an interview. So good on you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. We talked with Jerry Levine, who played Styles in Teen Wolf, and he said the same thing. He's like, I never thought I would be breaking down the character of Styles from Teen Wolf like this. And I took that as a compliment. I was like, yeah, there's people with enough time on their hands to really think about this stuff. And that's how it happened. So
hey, I just have one question for you guys.
You bet.
Hey, Clint and Noah.
Yeah.
Want to have a catch?
I love it, Dwier. Anytime, my friend. Let's do it. You're the best, man. Thank you for that, and thank you for everything that you've done for us. We'll definitely send you everything when we get it all together. We'll send you this, and we just appreciate everything you've done, man. Thank you.
There you go. My pleasure.